So good morning, everybody. So this is really an introduction. So, thank you so much for spending your time and coming along this morning. So what we're going to try and do is kind of talk to you a little bit about Marshall Assessment, what our role is in terms of the apprenticeship journey and the actual endpoint assessment itself, how individuals can prepare, what we've done to support that, the role of the training provider as well as the employer, and what we can and importantly what we can't do in terms of support or information and things like that, which is due to the way that we're regulated and the rules of the all-important assessment plan. So I'm going to fly through some of these slides and say if you've got questions, use the chat or shout out if you want to, and we'll try and get through this information in good time. So in terms of the apprenticeship standards that we offer, we are a specialist science endpoint assessment organisation. So at level 3, we offer the laboratory technician standard, science manufacturing and polymer processing technician. Level 5, we do the technician scientist. So we've been involved in that for quite some time. Level 6, laboratory scientist and clinical trials specialist. And then at level 7, research scientist, regulatory affairs specialist and soil scientist. So it's kind of an eclectic mix, but they all have science as their basis. So that's really what we do. We are looking at growing that. Things change all the time. New standards are prepared, and trailblazer groups brought together to create those on a regular basis. So we're always scanning and talking to our training providers and employers about what they would like to use, which standards are popular, and how we can help support them going forward. So at the moment, we work with the Institute for Apprenticeships and Technical Education, obviously known as IFATE. You will probably be aware that IFATE are looking at being changed or stepping down. IFATE are going. They are pretty much what was called an arm's length government organisation, not part of the Department for Education. And that's changing and going over to Skills England, which was announced late last year, I think around September time. And Skills England will take over that role, but they are a part of the Department for Education. So the way in which things have set up or have been set up for a number of years now is going to change. We're not entirely sure what those changes will mean, but we will keep everybody updated as we find out information, as anybody else does. So if you feel like you've missed anything, hopefully we'll be able to catch it for you. So in terms of how IFATE work and hopefully how Skills England will work, is effectively a trailblazer group is pulled together. Now you already know that, I'm sure. And one of the things that trailblazer group of employers will do is they will develop what the essential DNA is of that apprenticeship standard. So the knowledge, the skills, and the behaviours of that apprenticeship are decided upon, and that's based on the core duties. So as a technician scientist, there'll be a number of core duties, the KSBs that an individual would need to master in order to contribute fully in that role for their employer. And then at the end of that process, which can be quite long and drawn out, depending on a number of factors, they will then look for the endpoint assessment plan or the assessment plan. So for the vast majority of apprenticeship standards that are out there, the endpoint assessment organisation doesn't really play a role in that assessment plan. It's all to do with employers, giving employers the power to develop the types of programs they want, but they are steered very much by key people within IFATE that support that journey and that apprenticeship standard in its development. So one of the things that we wanted to make everybody very aware of is the fact that the endpoint assessment organisation, in the vast number of cases, will not have had any input on the assessment plan. The decisions that are made on what are the most appropriate assessment hurdles for that particular apprenticeship standard and what the assessment criteria are. Now, assessment criteria and KSBs are often one and the same, but there are standards out there where there can be some variation. Not necessarily surprises, because people should be aware quite early on and training providers are aware of what those criteria are, but it's the assessment criteria that our independent assessors will focus on. And that's what we need to establish evidence against, or at least the apprentice does, and that's what we're grading against. That's what we're really assessing. So a really key thing to do for any apprentice that's listening is to make sure you review that with your employer. Have a look at the occupational profile, the information that's held on that website. Make sure that your job role is a good fit. And we often talk about gaps. So training providers will look for gaps. Employers should look for gaps. And of course, apprentices themselves should be aware of what they do day to day and the bits that might not really fit with the apprenticeship standard that they're on. And that doesn't mean that there's a mistake has been made anywhere, but as you can imagine, apprenticeship standards aren't created for one person in that one particular job role working at that one employer in mind. So they're very much generic, and therefore that means there are going to be some elements that aren't a perfect fit. So really those are the kind of critical pinch points. Understanding where those gaps are really early on, and being able to do something about it, have a plan to address that so that an individual gets the experience. And whether that's to do with the training provider adapting slightly, whether it's the employer slightly changing job role, or allowing the individual some operational experience that where they can gain a better understanding of those types of KSBs, that's what's really important. But having that review, understanding really early on, really sets up for a successful program going forward from there. So really important. We do occasionally talk to people and they haven't necessarily seen that, and that could be training providers. Certainly employers won't always be aware of it, but it is really, really important. It is what we use. The assessment plan is where we go to for all the rules of that endpoint assessment, how the hurdles look, the timings, all of those kinds of things. And again, I'll just underline, we will not have created those. We are the individuals that have to faithfully deliver that endpoint assessment plan and make sure that those rules are faithfully adhered to as we assess individuals at the end of their apprenticeship. So what we have to be is independent. So we are an independent endpoint assessment awarding organisation. We are not part of the training provider. We are not the employer, although sometimes on some standards employers may have a role to play, and obviously not the apprentice either. So we're very separate and independent to all of those individuals that might have an input during the on-program elements of somebody's program. So it is independent. It is a third-party verification, and it's there to make sure that those KSBs, those knowledge, skills, and behaviours, have been developed to their fullest by an individual at the end of their program. So it's important that individuals are happy that they are ready for their endpoint assessment, and then that decision has been made with certain individuals in mind at that time. But we will send out an independent assessor to either to the site or online in meetings like this to carry out that endpoint assessment, and they will be assigned to individuals depending on their occupational competency. So the best possible fit for that particular apprenticeship standard and the focus of that individual within their sector. So we are a scientific endpoint assessment. Our independent assessors aren't employees of ours. We have around 7 employees, full-time permanent members of staff, and then we have around 30 active independent assessors. As you can imagine, with the range of apprenticeship standards that we support, we've got people in lots of different sectors with lots of different and varied occupational experience. So we try to match the most relevant assessor to the background of the individual, and that's really important to us because we have to maintain the integrity of the assessment process and have somebody who really understands the role, the job, and has got that experience. So lots of our individual assessors, the independent assessors, are currently active in that sector. It's not always a perfect match, but we do our absolute best to make sure that we get the strongest possible assessor for that individual. Okay, so the role of what we've got. So we are unbiased, we're independent, and that's what we're performing. So as apprentices, it's important that you understand that that's what we do. That's our role. We're evaluating the knowledge, skills, and behaviours by following the rules of the assessment plan, by looking at the assessment criteria, which you need to be familiar with, certainly when you come to your endpoint assessment days. So we are impartial. We're there to make sure that you meet that standard. And it's obvious to suggest that people will have good days and bad days, but preparation is going to make those bad days less likely for individuals. So the more prep that you can do, the better. And we will have created, and we have created, resources, guidance documents, and support materials for all of the standards that I showed you on the previous slide. So read through those, make sure you get hold of those. They're updated regularly, so you will have the most up-to-date ones sent out to you. So make sure that you read through those. It is really important, and it's not easy. It's not something that you can just breeze through without really putting the effort and the preparation into. We can really tell where somebody's taken some time, really looked at the documents. There's no surprises. Nobody likes surprises when they're being assessed, but there aren't any of those, and people can perform at their best because they're more relaxed. So that's what we're looking to do, is make sure that we've got an even and standardized approach, and that people are well supported before they come to us to be endpoint assessed. So what we can do, we can provide as much clarity as possible around those rules. So as training providers or employees or employers, if you have any questions about the assessment plan or any element of that process, get in touch with us. And if it's something we haven't already addressed in our materials, we will obviously look at that for you. But having clarity is really important. As I said, we don't want surprises, so make sure that you understand our interpretation of it by having a look at the materials, or getting in touch and communicating with us. So there shouldn't be anything hidden. So we can tell you exactly how we're going to do things. What we can't do, obviously, is share assessment materials with you. We can't always answer all of your questions either, if it goes beyond that line where we're giving you a potential advantage. So we can answer questions as much as we possibly can around the process, around what it will look and feel like. We can potentially meet with you as apprentices before the day, so you get to put a face to the name that you might have had already when you have your independent assessor assigned to you. If you want to hear what they sound like or have a look at them, have a chat, because it helps you on the day, it takes away from some of those nerves, let us know. One of the really important things as an endpoint assessment organisation is that our independent assessors are real people. They are there and they really want you to do well. They really want to support you as much as possible, and a big part of that is putting you at ease. So if we can do that in any way, if there's anything that we can do to help you where we can, we'll obviously look to do that as well. So we've done that on many occasions, and often that's really helpful. We'll try our best to keep you calm on the day and give you that opportunity to do your absolute best and demonstrate your really high level of skills throughout that assessment process. Okay, so what we can't do, we can't support you with your learning and development whilst you're on programme. So all of that on programme journey for you, we can't get involved with. Sure, we can come along at certain points and talk to apprentices about what the endpoint assessment looks like. Having that sight and understanding early on is often good, but I think there's a timing that's involved with that. Too early may not be terribly relevant or helpful. Too late, again, for the same reasons, perhaps isn't the right timing. So there is definitely a sweet spot for that, and we're really keen on getting in front of employers, clearly training providers who we have excellent working relationships with, hopefully as well, but also apprentices. So you can see what you're working towards. This is coming at you at the end of your programme, so having information about it is really, really helpful, because what you can do on programme to develop your evidence against that assessment plan, that's really key. So we can give feedback against types of examples that you might be working towards. We can't be massively specific, but we can certainly support training providers in certain elements, but we can't give really detailed information. So if we're talking to somebody in very specific terms on a piece of work that they're doing, and will that be sufficient, that's not something that we can do. We can talk about elements and give examples from ourselves of what might be good, and we try and do that. We try and break down assessment criteria so you can see the types of things, but being overly specific is very much frowned upon by Ofqual, who are external quality assurers. So the other thing we can't do is coach people. So there is again a line that we get from our external quality assurers about coaching. It's something which is very much frowned upon, and something which can cause real problems for an endpoint assessment organisation where we're stepping over that line. So it's not our job to coach. That's where your training provider, where your employer and your mentors will come in and really help you. So the training provider then having an understanding of the standard itself, knowing what the assessment criteria are and how they link to the KSBs, what good evidence looks like, and having that understanding that the way in which the assessment hurdles are set up can be reflected on programme to support individuals. So you know what it feels like when you get to an endpoint assessment. What does an observation feel like? What does a professional discussion feel like? And if you're having that type of experience on programme, that's an excellent way to develop evidence and understand how you can respond to questioning against assessment criteria. So guiding people throughout the apprenticeship programme, preparing, offering those practice or mock discussions, practice observations, those kinds of things. And I think, certainly where you're preparing key evidence for professional discussions, having an individual sit down with you from your training provider and asking you those questions, they'll have a really good feel for what's a strong answer and what perhaps needs to be bolstered. So it's really good practice for anybody who's an apprentice looking at getting or honing their skills, honing their responses, trying out certain examples and how you might go at approaching certain types of questions. That's really key. And that's also where the employer can come into as well. So supporting that, being part of the journey, understanding what the programme is, what the KSBs are, talked about gaps at the start. So if there are gaps, and quite often there will be a few, making sure that an apprentice has the opportunity to develop those types of things. I'll give a quick example. There may be lots of roles out there at level 7 that an individual doesn't get involved in intellectual property. But if there is an assessment criteria where an individual needs to discuss intellectual property, it may well be that whilst they're on programme, they can be a bit more involved in that kind of thing. They can understand a little bit more about how intellectual property might work and might be approached by the employer. And that can really strengthen responses later on. It may not be a key part of the role, but somebody can still explain how that fits into the job that they do in the wider context of that organisation. So I think if there's anybody else that's a graduate from an apprenticeship scheme, that's also really good. Somebody who's been through it before to help support somebody, help with those types of questioning and get them fully prepared. All of that is excellent practice and generally leads to really good results at the end of endpoint assessment. Okay, so the timeline, getting kind of into some of the more details then. Most programmes have to last 12 months. We have had news recently from the Labour government about fast track apprenticeships, those types of programmes that might be less than 12 months. We don't know much about them. We don't know exactly how that will fit in or how it will impact existing apprenticeship standards at the moment. But in all of the ones that we look at, the minimum timeline is more than 12 months anyway. So we, look to say that it's going to be at least that. It's going to be longer if there's an academic programme in there. On some of the apprenticeship standards, there is a need for an academic programme. It's mandated, but in lots of those that we looked at, there is no mandated qualification at degree level or master's level, but quite often that is what's delivered by the training provider, which is excellent where it's really nicely aligned to the apprenticeship standard, and where it isn't, that's made aware of, and individuals can have additional learning as well to hit those KSBs. So we will look to, at the end of the programme, get in touch with your training provider and yourselves about the gateway requirements, what it obviously is that you need to send to the endpoint assessment organisation to us, so that we can sign you off through that gateway into your endpoint assessment window. At the same time, if there's any additional information you might need for your assessment, like in the level 7 regulatory affairs specialist, we might give you a case study to work on post gateway. All of that information will be sent out, and we'll try our best to confirm with you a date for your endpoint assessment, or at least a window of how long it might be to nail down that date as quickly as we possibly can. And that helps us, and obviously helps individuals to prepare. So in terms of preparation, there may be some other questions. There may be some logistical questions that we'll also be able to help with and be able to support with as that date gets closer within that endpoint assessment window. So make sure you know what the total rules are, what is expected, what the gateway timelines are, what submission deadlines are if you've got to submit evidence during gateway. So the assessment plan, the rules within that will state exactly how many weeks that you have. There may be mitigating circumstances. Please talk to us. We can help with that. We can look at any mitigation for you wherever we can. But it's important that you meet those deadlines. Word counts, make sure you're aware of the word count rules. Anything that goes over word count just won't be assessed effectively. That's where that will stop. But it may be worse than that, depending on what the rules are. It may be more of a sanction than just not being assessed for those words. So make sure that you know it will be in the guidance documents too. So timings, how long you've got, what the rules of the assessment are. Is it open book? Is it closed book? What is it that you can expect, you need to be aware of. Really importantly, understand how the gradings work for you. There are some endpoint assessments, some standards that are graded at fail, pass and distinction. Others that have a merit grade. Others that have had a merit grade but have now changed. So all of those things are important. If you start on an apprenticeship and you also start at that on that particular date, you keep the assessment plan with you unless there is mitigating circumstances to change. But otherwise, all other things being equal, on the day you start, that assessment plan will travel with you through your journey on programme and through Gateway. So make sure you know what those rules are. On the day, we will need to establish you are who you say you are. So photo ID is what we will ask for at that point, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's online. So you'll need to show your ID before each element because they're each individually recorded and they stand alone. So again, you'll have to show that a few times. And company ID with a photograph, that's absolutely fine, or driving license, passport, obviously as well. Make sure that in terms of the day that you've got some work to do. If there's an observation at your place of work, make sure that that observation has been well planned, that there is work for you to do, that other people around you know that it's your observation day and how important that is and what they might need to do or not do on that day to help support you. So also be aware that your assessment, part of it, or in some cases all of it, may well be over Teams. Make sure that you've got a suitable environment with suitable broadband for that, so you've got the bandwidth so that there's no issues like that. If there are issues, we'll deal with them in a number of different ways I won't go into, but it doesn't mean a complete loss if you start to get some technical issues. Okay, and in some high levels there's also a requirement for a technical expert. So in that case, particularly level 6 laboratory scientists, they may well be sat there on the panel. So there's a little bit of logistics, a little bit of organisation, but we will help with that. That's part of our role. We'll confirm what the dates and timings are, check you're happy with all of those. We will share the information with individuals, so the training provider will know that we will take on that responsibility as long as we have all the correct details, and we'll make sure we can do tests and checks for connectivity ahead of time. So make sure that you're clear about how it will work, and if there are any problems at all, make sure we deal with them before the day. Obviously, you don't want to be in a kind of stressed environment and things starting to fall apart. Everything should be nicely squared away well before the day, so that you can focus on what you need to focus and do your absolute best on the day. Okay, yes, don't leave things to the last minute. Really important. So the assessment plan for each assessment is, there are themes which run through them, particularly for the ones that we offer, but they are going to be different. That's one thing you can absolutely be sure upon. Depending on the age of the assessment plan, how long ago it was developed, things may have changed. It may not have been refreshed very recently, or it might be brand new. So there's always changes and always differences between them. So make sure that you understand what those are. So the common hurdles may be an observation in a laboratory. Quite often at levels 5, 6, and 7, there'll be some kind of research project and presentation followed by questioning. Most of them have a professional discussion. It may not be called that. It could be a viva voce, it could be a structured interview, supported or underpinned by a portfolio of evidence. These are all slightly different and mean slightly different things, and also across different levels they might mean slightly different things as well. Higher levels might mean leading a conversation more. At lower levels, it may not quite be the same, more question and answer type on that particular assessment hurdle. And in some cases, there is a knowledge test. That may be a multiple choice test or some kind of written assessment as well that individuals need to undertake. So there is, as you can tell, a variation across those. So an important thing where your endpoint assessment involves a project, quite often that project is outside of the control of the apprentice themselves. There are other people involved at that employer site which can really help to support that, but also there is a danger that things can get derailed. Most of the time that is a deadline where priorities have moved and projects get pushed back. So we understand that this is it can be a very difficult thing to get right, but it's really important that you understand what those project requirements are, and we get agreement really early between employer, training provider and apprentice on exactly what's going to happen and when, and obviously try and fit to that timeline as much as possible. So plan early, make sure the project is a good fit for the endpoint assessment. Some things that the employer might want might not fit what the endpoint assessment plan needs. And that's not a Marshall assessment thing, but it needs to fit the endpoint assessment. So for that hurdle, that's a good place to start. What projects are there that will be a good fit for that particular endpoint assessment? And when they are a good fit, it really shows. It's a much easier way of demonstrating competency throughout the KSBs, where the project and the assessment plan are really, really well aligned. Okay, so running out of time slightly, so I'm going to move on. So where your endpoint assessment might involve a presentation, make sure that the presentation has been practiced. I know it's an obvious thing. There is a timeline associated with a delivery of a presentation where you have a maximum time you can't go past. So make sure that you hit the timings properly on that day and you've done a bit of practice. Make sure that your presentation has new information in it other than what might be in a project. So there are some key assessment criteria that fit so much better inside a presentation where you can talk about your logic, why you've made decisions, and you can make that information come to life where it might not fit very well inside a written report. So make sure you have an awareness on that. Again, guidance documents are a good place to start. Make sure it adds value, and as I say, practice that. Make sure you've got an audience to practice online over Teams, things like that. You're in the same environment, it makes sense. So the structured discussion, the professional discussion, the Viva, whichever it is, prepare that as well. Be really, really sure that your evidence meets the assessment criteria. Remember, it's the assessment criteria that we're interested in. The vast majority of cases, it's what you say on the day that is the evidence. There are a couple of standards, the regulatory affairs one in particular, where the evidence can be pre-assessed. But on the day, the questions that you're answering as an apprentice, that's the evidence that we have. And quite often the evidence that you've supplied us with will allow us to contextualize our questioning. So we're asking you specifically about examples within that body of evidence so that you can respond to that. So that should be very helpful. But make sure that you understand what the pass criteria are in terms of assessment criteria, what the distinction criteria are, and make sure when you're asked a question that you cover lots of areas. Remember, it's not a Q&A. It's a starter for 10 for an apprentice where they can start to discuss in more detail lots of different criteria for a subject area within that professional discussion. So give relevant scientific information, relevant scientific examples, workplace examples. Make sure that there's a depth of information there that covers the pass criteria at least, and practice. Have people ask you those questions, practice on bringing out other examples, and you can have support information with you. The support information is really vital, but if there's too much there, it will hold you back and you will run out of time. So the things that you know instinctively, intuitively, that you can talk about all day, you don't need the evidence for with you. The things that you struggle a little bit with, an aid memoir is excellent. You can go straight to it. It can support you. It can get you through those things that you have a little bit more trouble with. That's really where it's at. Having lots and lots of notes, as I say, it can take up too much time and you'll end up searching for things that you won't find in the pressure of the moment. And so it will slow you down, as I say. So know the rules, know if it's open, if you can bring notes with you, if it's closed, if it's exam type conditions. Make sure you've got a quiet room. Make sure you know the timings and how long you've got so that you can get everything out that you need. Your independent assessor will support you with timings and make sure that you get as far through as possible with an eye on the clock. And make sure, you make the most of the time that you've got. So it is about you as the apprentice. It's your assessment. Make sure that you've planned it, that it fits in with you, that you are ready, that you are prepared. If you've got doubts, speak to your training provider. See about pushing it slightly back as long as the timelines allow you to do so. Talk about what you do and what you did. We want examples about what it is that you are doing that are relevant to that, so that if it's something like research scientist, that's the apprenticeship standard. Talk about your role as a research scientist, not about something else, because that's the information that we're looking at assessing you against. So if you have multifaceted roles, you need to focus on those examples that are relevant directly to that assessment plan and that apprenticeship standard. So we want to support you. We may have straight faces. Our independent assessors aren't giving you affirmation and of you've done well and nodding and going that was great, because they're not allowed to. So they will have fairly straight faces, but after the assessment's finished, you'll find them smiling again and being a bit more human. So it's difficult for people to not want to support you when you're answering questions. It's a human thing to do. But when they're not doing that, they are still supporting you. And they'll probably mention this before they start to try and put candidates at ease. So they have to remain unbiased and objective. They can't give indication of your doing well. And very quickly, I'll mention this why. If they start nodding and smiling, you might think, you're fine, you've done really well, and you don't give any other examples. You may well have had other examples, but you think, I don't need to. And then you find that you've just missed the grade that you wanted to get. And you're kind of a bit upset because, well, you thought you were doing really well. So that's not the only reason. There are others, but that's one of the key things. It's about that dynamic and making sure that people give everything that they can on the day. Don't let it put you off, though. So just coming towards the end, so all of the guidance documents I've mentioned, we have a pack for each of them, and they all contain an overview of the standard itself, of the gateway process and the endpoint assessment. Then you'll have detailed guidance for each. You'll have templates for mapping your evidence so that you can see that you've covered all of the assessment criteria when you submit your information at Gateway. There'll be all sorts of different templates that we can support you with. Some of these aren't mandatory at all, but they're there to support you. So make sure that you read it and you understand that. If you have any questions, obviously ask. There'll be Gateway declarations for individuals, for employers, for training providers, all of the standard stuff. And if there are things that you aren't seeing that you want, whether that's training provider, employers, get in touch. If there are gaps, let us know, and we'll see about what we can do to fill those gaps to support you more where we can. So use the evidence mapping documents, use the logs when you're compiling your evidence, check that what needs to be evidenced is in there and that you're confident that you can talk about it. If we've got and supplied mock knowledge tests, sample questions, they're usually in there. I think they should be for all of them. Use them. Do look at those documents, and the people that do look at them are generally the people that it's obvious they do really well, and it's clear that they've invested time. So after your endpoint assessment and just finishing, obviously your evidence is reviewed by the independent assessor. They will then submit that assessment and that grading to our quality team. So we'll have an independent internal quality assurance process that will look at that evidence and make sure assessment decisions are standardized and are accurate and are fair. We will always do what we call a fact check on all pieces of evidence that come through, all assessments that come through, to make sure timings have been maintained, signatures are where they need to be, and all of that, so that it is valid to start off with. In terms of grade from us, then once it goes through the internal process for quality, that will be confirmed within 10 to 15 working days, and it could be earlier. It depends on how busy we are at the time, but it won't go past that point unless, again, there's some kind of mitigation at our end, but that's quite rare. So that then is sent over to your training provider. That evidence of confirmation of grade will be sent over. It will be a PDF, and they will pass that on to you. And certification can take a little bit longer, so we will then obviously submit that grade to the apprenticeship service, who will then pass it to iFate to create the certificate. As it says there, it can be up to 7 to 9 weeks, depending on how busy they are. And they will send that out to your employer, to the address that we give them. So make sure all those details are correct. It's usually the employer address that we will have. But if it needs to be something else, obviously, again, get in touch and we can change that and make sure it goes to the right place. Okay, so we talked about contacting us, about communicating with us. It's really key. So here's our help desk email address for you. There's information about policies and all sorts of things on our website as well, so do take a look at that. And obviously we've got our address there. We're based in the Midlands, but obviously deliver nationally. So hopefully that information was helpful to you. As I say, I'll be able to pass this recording out. So if you're watching on the recording, thank you very much for your time. And for those of you that are watching live today, thank you again for your time. I hopefully that was valuable to you. And if you've got any questions, we can deal with them now.